Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the official launch of Swiftly Finance, a product that has been developed to empower supply chains with speed, flexibility, and financial freedom.
So hello everybody, welcome to Conversations in Supply Chain. Today we are with Swiftly Finance and we're talking supplier financing. We're going to be hearing from Mr. Kush about Swiftly Finance. Welcome Mr. Kush to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, we're so grateful to have you. We just want to get to know about Swiftly Finance, get us through the products that you offer and the general overview of the company or the group. Where did you start? Tell us about your journey.
Yeah, most definitely. So I'll start, I guess, with an introduction of myself and then how the company and the product came about. So I'm Kush Panikiso for everyone watching. I am a software engineer by training. So most of my career has been built primarily in Silicon Valley. I've worked for a bunch of small companies and then a few, I guess, titans. So I've worked at PayPal, I've worked at Facebook, I've worked on Instagram, and so a few big global products.
Oh, you
And
worked at
I
Facebook.
moved back, yes.
Quite interesting.
Yeah, so I moved back to Botswana at the end of 2023 with the goal of doing a few various things. One, I'm working on a digital wallet, and the other side, I run a software consulting firm called EX Labs, Easy Exchange Laboratories. And so what we do at EX Labs is we build software for government, for companies large and small, and so that's kind of what we're doing on that side. And then my business partner Theo, who couldn't make it today, and he runs Kana Capital, which is a supply chain financing partner. And so they come in at different points of the supply chain. They primarily focus, I think, on invoice discounting, but they assist small businesses across their supply chain. And so Swiftly Finance is an application that was built by Kana X Technologies, which is a joint venture between Kana Capital and EX Labs. And what Swiftly Finance is, or what it does, is it's an invoice discounting platform. It allows a supplier to log on and view all of the invoices that they have that they're approved by a buyer and request early payment on those.
Buyer is like the procuring entity.
Yes. So I know this is a supply chain podcast, but just for people that may not be familiar with, I'll give an actual use case. So let's say that you, Boto, are a farmer. You produce, spinach, maize, potatoes, and different nuts and tomatoes, and you supply to a large grocery chain. So it might be Choppy, Spar, Pick and Pay, Checkers, just name a grocery chain. And so you might give that grocery chain, let's say 20,000 worth of produce. And because for them produce, they start selling immediately, but that grocery chain may have 30, maybe even 50 other farmers that they get different products from throughout the month. And so they don't have the process, and really it's not worth it for them to consistently be servicing invoices. So what they do is when you give them that 20,000 worth of produce, you'll invoice them and say, okay, I'm giving you this much. And they'll say, okay, we approve it. They'll start selling the merchandise immediately. But they'll say, no, but we'll only pay you at the end of the month. We're only going to settle all of our invoices at one point. Because for the entire grocery shop, they might actually have 300, 500 suppliers. And so that's how their process works. But you as a small farmer are now down. You have an asset for 20,000, but you can't realize that asset or the value of it until that happens. And that's where we come in as Swiftly. You can go on if the grocery chain is one of our buyers, you'll be able to view your invoice for 20,000 and request early payment on that invoice. We might discount the invoice, so let's say 500 pula. So you get early payment of 19,500, and then we now receive ownership of the invoice. And at the end of the month, the grocery store will pay us 20,000, and so we will make essentially 500 off of that transaction.
Lovely, but I'm also interested in how are you different from other market players, who are in the same space and who also do, financing. I'm also quite interested in the fact that you are looking at it from a supply chain point of view. You understand that there are different people in the processing and trying to assist, or bring the two players or two people together. So how are you different from the rest of the players in the market?
Yeah, good question. So I think the platform itself is the big differentiator. We're as far as I know, the only people that have a locally built invoice discounting platform.
Lovely.
And actually maybe that's a bit of background that I skipped out on, which is that Connect Capital is a supply chain financing company. They've been doing this for years at this point. They're licensed by NBFIRA. And so they used to have an application that they were licensing to manage their invoice discounting process. But as sometimes happens with any piece of software that you're licensing, you may need features that are specific to your market or specific to your use case or your customer. And those may not exactly align with the direction or interest of the company that you're licensing from. And so they were running into more and more of these challenges. One of them, for example, is they also service mining. Some of the invoices in mining can be quite big. So someone can, maybe supply, electrical wire or oil or something, and they have an invoice for 50,000, and they may not want to sell the entire value of that invoice. So they might only, as a supplier, they might say, okay, I need 20,000, and so they might only need a fraction of that. That's one of the things that's actually a really unique feature differentiator of Swiftly Finance. So one is obviously that locally built product that has these kind of unique market specific features. The other one is the process that we use to actually get invoices into our platform. So we get invoices directly from the buyer's ERP system or through FTP, which is just file transfer protocol, or through a file that they give us. But essentially we get approved invoices from the buyer. And so that reduces the risk for us, because it's the buyer saying, so in your case, you don't give us the invoice and say, I have an invoice from the grocery store. Because that can introduce, fraud, double payment, you can give it to someone. All these things can come into play. And so for us, we're actually getting the information directly from the off-taker or the buyer, and therefore every invoice on our platform is available or viable for early payment. And so it makes the management process easier. There are also things that we do around, we expect that suppliers will actually be using our application to manage some of their process, because they can view all of their invoices. They don't need early payment, they can still generate reports and do a lot of other things that don't accrue fees or payment from them. And so that's one of the things, is there are actually still quite a few other features that they can use.
So there's a bit of supply chain management features in the platform that the supplier or the buyer can use.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, I think now that you've solved 70% of the problem that suppliers have, and then potentially buyers also have when it comes to cybersecurity. Sometimes we don't tend to want to use platforms like this because, of issues of fraud. How do I protect myself as a supplier or as a buyer from, cases of fraud? So I think this is a very good product. It encompasses a lot of, solutions. And then, do you happen to have industries that you are focusing on, or you are an overall, platform for everybody?
Good question. So we are, I'd say the latter. We're an overall platform for everyone. There are a few. So we had the launch obviously a few at the beginning of the month, and we primarily focused on telecommunications and mining, but we are very broad. So for example, we do want to get some of the grocery chains on our platform. We want to get government entities. We're talking to a few different government departments, because we know government has fairly broad supply chains, especially after tendering processes and all of these things happen. So government tends to have a pretty wide supply chain as well. There are also interesting use cases that we are exploring with apps, for example. It doesn't happen as much here, but let's say in South Africa, you can pay, let's say if you're an InDrive driver or an Uber driver, a lot of the payments here happen by cash, but in other markets where they have more digital payment platforms, it actually happens digitally, and then you as a driver get paid at the end of the month. And so what actually then happens is, but in between the month as a driver, you still need money for fuel, you still need money to service your car, change the oil, the tires, and all of that. So maybe you're making 10,000 a month, which you're only going to get at the end of the month. And so all of those rides are actually invoices, and you could theoretically go on the platform and say, okay, I need 1,500 to service my car and keep the business, because now I need to get more rides into this. So we're pretty broad in how we are viewing it. We've kind of started out with mining and telecommunications, but we're thinking about it as a very broad platform.
Wow. I like that you look at different terrains in different countries, and you try to customize your product to fit into the scale or the size or the kind of market that you're operating in. And the examples that you're using are quite easy to understand. So I think this is going to be quite helpful for the people out there. So we do have a problem, I'd say globally, in terms of financial crisis here and there. Economies are not doing well. So what impact does it have on your platform, especially for the suppliers, or where we have delaying payments between buyers and suppliers? How does your platform help? I want it to be highlighted for them to know, like, what is the benefit of using your platform as a supplier?
That's a great question and an interesting one, because there was a debate recently online where someone said, well, hakuna maji, so what's the point of the platform? And so I think one thing that I like to do is state explicitly what the problem we're seeking to solve is. We're not solving the problem of hakuna maji or the global, we're not solving the global financial crisis, so to speak, What we're solving is a specific problem where suppliers, especially small suppliers, are servicing off-takers or buyers, and then those buyers have long payment terms. And so where we come in, what we do is we turn those assets or those invoices into instant payments. And so that's kind of how the term bridge financing comes in, where we're the bridge between the invoice getting serviced and the payment happening. We actually had one supplier who came and they said they sometimes get paid up to 90 days. So their off-taker says, I think they have to give a statement, so that's 30 days, and then from the statement they invoice, or the other way around. But they've had situations where they're going 17 something days without payments, and I'm like, that's kind of the specific problem we're solving. And so, coming to your question around late payments, because the platform is it's built to be very configurable, especially for the African context. Again, so as a let's say if you're a supplier, you've supplied to your grocery store, and you've now been paid for that 19,500 for that 20,000 invoice. If the grocery shop pays late, what usually happens is that you may incur a fee perhaps on future requests. Or we also have some situations where we're talking to some of the entities and some of the off-takers where we give them a longer grace period, so that, because one thing we're realizing is that buyers or off-takers want to hold their capital as long as possible. And so we're coming up with different terms, and the system allows us to say, okay, this buyer has a 30-day grace period, this buyer has a 2-week grace period, and over time the system is also learning the risk. So it's learning this buyer does tend to pay on time, and therefore we transfer some of those savings back to the supplier. So maybe instead of a 2% rate, you might get a 1.5 because the buyer that you're working with pays better. And so that these things that the system allows us to do that are kind of built specifically for the African context.
Okay, that's great. But I also wonder, in how many countries are you operating?
So right now we've launched in Botswana. We have a financier that we're talking to in Zambia that wants to license the platform there, and we're talking to a telco in South Africa that also wants to use it because they have a fairly large supply chain. And so Botswana, we launched in Botswana, but we're exploring South Africa and Zambia as well.
So we probably have similar challenges in other countries, especially in Africa. So what are I would say the one big challenge that you like to highlight that you've been facing in the business, considering in Botswana or in the African continent or the African terrain?
The one big challenge, let's see. I think it is that one of the payments and managing that kind of process. So figuring out the right grace period for different suppliers, and figuring out, because the thing that Theo and I talk about a lot is what we want to do is we don't just want to say we're supporting small businesses. We want to see small businesses become big businesses so that eventually they can get off the platform and do this. Because if a big business services let's say a mine, and they give them an invoice for 50,000, and the mine says, okay, we'll pay you in a month. For big businesses, that's fine, and they don't have to take any discounts on those invoices, etc. And our goal is to see small businesses become big businesses, and so that is, I think, one of the big challenges, and that's kind of why we're in this unique position where we take on a lot of that risk of that late payment, so that you as a supplier can go and continue to grow. So if you're a farmer, you can buy fertilizer and all of the you can actually pay your staff. So a lot of them might have farmers have staff that are helping them. There are all these things, and they're living
and expenses quite a lot. So I think now the issue of we talk about financial inclusion quite a lot in Botswana, and quite a lot of banks are moving towards supplier development, supplier management, taking on risk. And just overall trying to improve business sustainability. So I guess your platform is also targeting the same, to say we want you to grow. We're not only here to take off or to take from your business, but we want to also help you. So that just brings me to the last question, and that is, what does the future look like for us in African terrain, small, medium businesses? And also in your platform, what other products are you seeking to, bring to us on board that we can benefit from, looking at the market that we have?
Yeah, I've mentioned I'm a technologist, I'm a builder of products. There's always this anxiety where you wish the future would happen now, but obviously now has to happen for that to become the reality. But the long-term vision, I'll speak mostly on the platform. The long-term vision for the platform is actually less for it to be an invoice discounting platform and more for it to be an invoice discounting marketplace. And so what I mean by that is, we'll come back to this example of you as a farmer to a grocery store. So you have an invoice for 20,000 that you've given to the grocery store that you supply. And so then right now there's one financier that's tied to we call it a program that you have with that grocery store. And they might say, okay, we will discount 500 pula and we'll give you 19,500. What we want to see is potentially multiple financiers. So maybe a bank comes in, another supply chain company. There are a few companies that do supply chain financing, so they also come in. We're very open as far as our partnerships and how we're thinking about it. So they can say, okay, you know what, we're willing to take on slightly higher risk and give you 19.8. Or another one says, if it gets paid early, you'll get 19.9, but maybe you get a higher fee. And so now the supply gets these options of what serves me as a business better.
What can work for me?
And so that kind of marketplace is a thing that we want to see sooner rather than later, where there are multiple financiers and suppliers get better options and they get more choices as far as the terms that they get.
They have options.
And
who doesn't want to have options?
And so, and even just across the board, we know that banks tend to do larger, car, home, business, etc. But the challenge that they have with these with supply chains is that they don't have the data and they don't have the process to manage the risk, liquidity, all of that. But they want to go in there because banks don't want to hold their money, right? Off-takers want to hold their money because it gives them interest, etc. Banks only make interest so much as they give their money away and then it comes back. And so we know that banks are also interested in servicing supply chains across the board, but don't know how to do that. And so we're hoping eventually, I mentioned we're talking to 3 banks that are interested in actually adding more finance behind, or more capital behind the platform. This will allow us to go for more industries, service more suppliers, and just increase the broader supply chain. So that for me, gets us closer to that marketplace that I want to see, and hopefully sooner rather than later.
And as an entrepreneur, if you came to Lenofta Solutions and want to know how it can benefit you, simply go onto their LinkedIn.
That's a LinkedIn, so that's one way that a lot of people have been reaching out. I actually think that's how we got connected. And then most of the process is managed by Kana Capital. So you can also email admin@kana.co.bw, and I forget the number off the top of my head, but I'd say email and LinkedIn are the two best ways to reach us.
We'll definitely also add it to our link here and drop the number so that they can reach you. So this is a solution for you as a supplier if you've been wondering how can you get help across, benefiting from procuring entities but continue business while you're still holding on to that invoice to get paid 90 days, 30 days later. So this is your platform to go to. We'll drop the link. Also check out their LinkedIn page for more information. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been incredible having you.
Yeah, thank you for having us.